learners, welcome to the 15th lesson of my course Ecology from Cells to Gaia. Today we will talk about biomass, photosynthesis and carbon sequestration. A combination of paleobotanical, isotope and modeling work has suggested that the terrestrial biomass recovered extremely quickly, possibly in less than 100 years, while the marine system took some 3 million years to return to its pre-impact productivity. Thus, biomass recovered on a much faster scale, even in the oceans, than was required for the evolution of replacement species, therefore productivity recovered much faster than biodiversity. Given a suitable climate and soils, high biomass vegetation can easily develop in a timescale of 100 years or less if ecological appropriate plant species are available. Grimm, in 1998, suggested the mass ratio hypothesis. He said that the extent to which a plant species affects ecosystem function is likely to be closely predictable from its contribution to the total biomass. It is the total biomass, normally made up of a very limited subset of species, which governs most ecosystem services. The majority of rare species instead contribute very little. If the activities of life were tending to force this system towards an uninhabitable state, for example through the production of some metabolic byproduct, then as the planet approached this uninhabitable state, these organisms would increasingly struggle, and so the forcing would be reduced. An alternative is that natural selection may produce something which consumes the byproduct. The dominant life forms, by biomass rather than number of species or individuals, may control the properties of a planet's biosphere, at least until the rise of an intelligent species with an industrial economy. The release of oxygen as a waste product of oxygenic photosynthesis has been a key factor in the Earth's ecological history and the evolution of its atmosphere. Oxygenic photosynthesis has the potential to create an oxygen-rich atmosphere and so allow aerobic respiration, which yields much higher amounts of energy than anaerobic respiration, such as fermentation, and so allows longer food chains and more complex ecosystems. On Earth, about half of the primary production is produced by marine microbes. Some of the most important members of the phytoplankton are the cyanobacteria. Chloroplasts in plant cells were originally derived from prokaryotes, so an oxygenic photosynthesis predates oxygenic photosynthesis, and this can be considered a sort of symbiotic photosynthesis. Aerobic food chains can potentially support many more trophic levels than anaerobic ones. Since size is a major factor in structuring many food chains, longer food chains make possible the abundance of macroscopic animals. In general, multicellular predation may require an oxygen-rich atmosphere for its evolution. An interesting fact is that oxygen levels had never been low enough to prevent forest fires, or there would be gaps in the charcoal record, and never so high that wet vegetation could burn uncontrollably. Otherwise, forests could not have existed. The oxygen concentration of the atmosphere has stayed between certain limits over the last 350 million years. It has remained stable at 0.2–0.1 bar over the Phanerozoic. This appears surprising, since the total oxygen content of the atmosphere is cycled through the biota once approximately every 4,500 years. Photosynthesis is obviously not necessary to life. Non-light-based ecosystems are known on Earth from sites such as around hydrothermal vents and some apparently sealed caves. However, many of the organisms involved in the system use oxygen, which is the product of oxygenic photosynthesis on other parts of the planet. So, is oxygenic photosynthesis so likely to arise on a planet that it should be considered a fundamental ecological process? Peatland species illustrates the potential for life to sequester carbon in sediments. This is fundamental to any Earth-type ecological system and is a process of great practical importance in the context of global warming on Earth. Two key factors in the long-term or geological carbon cycle are the fluxes of carbonate carbon. These are often intimately connected with the weathering of silicate minerals and are usually overlooked in descriptions of the carbon cycle in ecological textbooks. Silicate weathering is a potential abiotic negative feedback mechanism which could stabilize the Earth's surface temperature over geological time. In the absence of terrestrial life, it is likely the soil will be rare due to the erosion by water and wind action. With the first terrestrial vegetation, such as stabilizing crust of bacteria, algae, and lichens, soil will be able to start to resist erosion. Biology increases the rate of silicate weathering by a number of mechanisms. It seems that on Earth the biotic enhancement of weathering may have been crucial to the continued survival of eukaryotes. When plants moved onto land, water loss could have become more of a problem, which is obviously not the case for aquatic plants. In response to this, they evolved a cuticle which is relatively impervious to water. However, photosynthesis requires that CO2 can enter the plant, so this cuticle has to be pierced by stomata, which allows air to enter the plant but also water loss from the plant. As such, there is a trade-off between conserving water and assessing CO2. It can be argued that plant responses to a low CO2, involving higher stomatal densities, allow the larger leaves to develop. Biogeochemically, aerobic respiration is the reverse of photosynthesis, so for oxygen produced by photosynthesis to persist in the atmosphere, some organic material must escape respiration by other organisms and become buried in sediments. Without such carbon sequestration, oxygen cannot build up in the atmosphere. The rate of silicate weathering under the influence of vegetation and CO2 has important implications for the oxygen. This is because increased weathering causes more phosphate from rocks to enter the oceans, so allowing more planktonic photosynthesis, which produces a net increase in the atmospheric oxygen if some of the planktonic carbon is sequestered in the marine sediments. At the same time, high oxygen increases the magnitude of forest fires, providing a negative feedback to the silicate weathering cycle by reducing terrestrial vegetation. The long-term sulfur cycle is also linked to the carbon and oxygen cycles, for example by the oxidative weathering of pyrite. We saw that biologically controlled carbon sequestration is likely to be present on any planet with carbon-based life. Although we can say little that is sensible about the probability of an intelligent species with higher technology evolving on another planet, we can predict with reasonable certainty that it will not only happen once on each planet, or at least be separated in geological time by a period long enough for the regeneration of fossil fuel supplies outcropping at the planet's surface. Although we can say a little that is sensible about the probability of an intelligent species with high technology evolving on another planet, we can predict with reasonable certainty that it will only happen once on each planet, or at least be separated in geological time by a period long enough for the regeneration of fossil fuel supplies outcropping at the planet's surface. So I have a final question for you. Considering that the effects of vegetation or plankton or carbon cycles is more directly linked to available biomass than species richness, how will this change with global warming in the behavior of the Earth system? So thank you for your attention, see you in the next module.